People need to know about a species in order to act on behalf of that species and protect their habitat.
Hello and welcome to Polar Bears International's Fall Tundra Connections series. The polar bear migration is one of the most extraordinary events in the natural world, offering a super rare glimpse into the lives of these unique animals. So once again, we have a mix of educational webcasts and fun, casual live chats aboard Tundra Buggy 1. That's where we're sitting right now with polar bears just outside our window. And we have a polar bear just outside that we've been spending time with, hanging out with all morning today. So this vehicle, Tundra Buggy 1, really provides a window into the Arctic for all of you and anyone who's interested in polar bears. So today's educational webcast is called Storytelling in Culture and Conservation. And our target audience is a general audience today, but all ages can learn something and you can ask questions. So this program will last for about 30 to 45 minutes, including some time for Q&A. And we encourage you to use the chat window. It's just below the viewer that you're watching this webcast on. You can also use the comments on explore.org or on social media if you're watching on Facebook. And we've got folks watching all those places and they'll send your questions our way. And as always, if you're a younger student, if you're tuning in, make sure you ask an adult for permission first before using the internet. So today we're on the traditional lands of the Cree, the Dene, the Inuit, and the Métis people within Treaty 5 territory in Canada. And this place, Churchill and the coast of Hudson Bay, is incredible. It's always been a gathering place and a meeting place. So Indigenous peoples, from the north, from the south, from inland, and in Churchill would come here to meet, to gather, to trade. And it was a really important location for the fur trade in Canada. So there's a huge mixture of incredible cultures here in Churchill. And this, broadcast is very unique because we have two very special guests with us today. Our topic is stories. And so one of our special guests is an Indigenous knowledge keeper and a Cree elder from Churchill. And so I'd like to start with each of our stories and how it is that we all ended up together sitting in these chairs here on Buggy One today. So Georgina, could you tell us your story a little bit and how you're here with us today?
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here as part of an educational setting about polar bears. I did a research study with KT this summer. And we use the storytelling technique to do the research rather than the traditional questions and answers. And it turned out fabulous, and so we got to do it again.
We've had a lot of fun. We got to spend a lot of time together this summer, and Georgina's lived in Churchill her whole life, and her family is from the area for generations. And yeah, we've just had a fabulous time, and so I asked Georgina if she might be willing to come out and share some of her stories and her knowledge with us today. So we're super excited about that. And we also have Paul with us today. We're so excited to have you here, along with partners from the San Diego Zoo. So Paul, can you tell us your story? How did you end up sitting here on a Tundra Buggy with us right now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. It's really fun to join. My name is Paul Baribault. I'm President and CEO of San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. We operate the San Diego Zoo and the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. We also support conservation projects around the globe, focusing on 8 conservation hubs. The Oceans Hub is one of our priority hubs, and Polar Bears International is our partner to support polar bear work here in the north. So it's an honor to be here. I joined San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance after 22 years at Disney, where I led animation marketing for Disney and Pixar, and also was general manager of the Disney Nature label, which recently had a polar bear film. So that was a 10-year journey leading that label, and became a very passionate believer in the power of story and how to do so authentically. So very special to be here. Honor.
Absolutely. And And we've spent a lot of time and worked really closely with the San Diego Zoo. And also we were involved with the film Polar Bear, which maybe some of you viewers have watched that. We did a few other Tender Connections about polar bear earlier this year. And that movie is just incredible. The footage of bears and the story, following a mother polar bear with her cubs, and how she teaches them and how they learn, how to be polar bears and how to survive in the Arctic. It's just amazing. So we're so excited to have you here today and talk about the power of story. And that film was filmed in Svalbard, and Georgina and I visited Svalbard.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, just this year, yeah. So it shows the mountains and the glaciers and the landscape there, and so we're all connected in that way as well. I love what you said there, Paul, about stories and the power of story. And when I think of story nowadays, now that I'm kind of using it in my research, it's just become so apparent how much story shapes who we are and how we think. Whether it's from fairy tales that you hear as a kid, or if your parents maybe sung you songs to get you to fall asleep, the movies we watch, the books we read. So storytelling across cultures is just really part of how we come to know the world. And so Georgina, I know that storytelling is very inherent to Indigenous cultures. And I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit, about the Cree culture and Cree people and why storytelling is important to you.
Yeah, storytelling's been a traditional way to share, any information you needed to share within your people, whether they're travels or hunting. It was the way that they shared history, from generation to generation. They have grandparents telling our parents, and then our parents telling us, and it was generally the same information that there was no book, so it wasn't recorded in books. It was always oral storytelling. And Halloween was a fun time to tell stories around the campfire. You'd hear some pretty scary stories, and sometimes you didn't know if they were true or not, but that was another, but most traditions and cultural practices were shared with storytelling.
Yeah, and it is Halloween today. We're out on the buggy on Halloween, and maybe we'll have to circle back to that later, because Halloween in Churchill is a pretty special thing. And
it is.
And the whole town tonight is going to be, on alert for Halloween. So lots of stories there. And storytelling, as you say, it's this way of communicating and passing on knowledge from generation to generation, and it's super, super important. And Paul, we were talking about Disney and the film and story there. So, connecting, we have, sort of traditional storytelling, but, we're moving away from that term traditional because it's very much alive today in Indigenous cultures, storytelling. But maybe more for folks that maybe don't live in the North, storytelling through media, through movies, through things like that, is really important. So can you tell us, Paul, a little bit about how storytelling influences mainstream media and just your experience in that realm?
Yeah, I think from a storytelling standpoint, audiences digest information best through story. We are storytellers. We understand the world through story, and so it creates a very powerful way to communicate messages, whether it's one of hope or one of despair or one of challenges. Storytelling is a way that we can understand each other better. And I think in media, it certainly is a piece that media tries to figure out, how do we tell the story most effectively, as quickly as possible. Or in a movie type context, how do you tell a story that really brings an audience in to engage with that subject, engage with that story, and find sort of a truth in that story. And I think that's what's so powerful about that, is really in creating films and creating stories, is find that truth that audiences will really latch onto and feel the power of the emotion. of, and get them to understand the true center of that story. We would oftentimes at Disney talk about the need to balance the heart and the mind in a story, and that it was the heart that opened up the idea of a passionate idea or subject and would bring you in, and then the mind would sort of wrestle with that idea a little bit, and it would deal with the complexity of the emotion that you felt. And finding the right way to tell those stories that really bring audiences in can be quite powerful and very true in all forms of storytelling, whether it's film, television, or even just around a campfire.
I love that. I love the heart piece. And I feel like we saw some of that in some of the storytelling we did.
We did, yeah. We, especially with the younger group, they were so excited to share, you know, some of their scary stories that they had as children, and yeah, so getting to the heart of the story is important. Yeah.
Yeah, and so at Polar Bears International, just bring it back a little bit to the buggy here, the bear outside the window, you know, the bear's sort of sitting up, kind of, it's been scratching around, looking out. If you were watching the cam, like, what was it, maybe 30 minutes ago, the bear was actually stalking a seal and then ran out into the water to try to catch the seal, which was pretty incredible. But, you know, at Polar Bears International, we're always trying to bring the story of the polar bear to the world, right? And we use a lot of different ways of doing that. So whether that's filmmaking, the live cams, these Tundra Connections broadcasts, you know, bringing the story and creating this window into the Arctic and the subarctic. So, Paul, you're with San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance now. You were with Disney. That story was incredible. But so now you're in this different role working with the zoo. And so can you tell me some more stories about, you know, what role zoos can play in conservation?
Absolutely. I think it's really a powerful data point that we probably don't do a good enough job explaining to the world and the public about the role of zoos in conservation. And we're very proud at San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance about how we support organizations around the world, as well as bring a variety of skills to that work. So whether it's disease investigation or nutritional knowledge or caring for an animal from birth to death, the entire span of every challenge that animal has, we learn a tremendous amount every day. And we get to share that with partners around the world, that we can transport that knowledge as a partner's trying to solve challenges in the field. We get to diagnose the health of an animal, we get to assess the health of an animal every day in our care. And we manage that very carefully with a great deal of attention. So the ability to then share that knowledge with partners such as PBI and others to really help understand what's happening in the native habitats out in the wild, we can all get smarter and figure out what, in this case, what bears need and how we can be the best supporters and advocates of that. We also then get to support that message on grounds, where we see over 5.5 million guests a year coming through our zoo and our park. We have hundreds of millions of guests that we connect through social media each year. We reached over 91 billion impressions this last year as an organization. We have the ability to reach a lot of people. And so we get to then not only share what we get to learn on grounds, but we get to share the discoveries that our partners are finding out here and sharing that through partnerships we can do this together. And I think that's one of the things that I've really wanted to have organizations celebrate is that our name, we changed our name in the last couple of years to San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. And that idea of an alliance is very much that partnerships matter. To be successful in the wild, we all bring different skills, we all bring different knowledge. How can we bring our best selves to that work, share all of our knowledge, partner, and figure out how we can help wildlife the best way we can with both of the skills that we get to bring to the challenge. So that's something that we're very passionate about. And we get to share that message on social media or in person with guests who visit. And you know, there's very few people that will get to come up here and visit you guys. And so how can we give that experience to guests there so that they can understand that what we're learning from the polar bears at the San Diego Zoo, how they're teaching us every day, allows you guys to benefit from that knowledge.
Absolutely, and it's amazing that zoos and aquariums in North America see more people than all major sporting events combined. So you have this amazing ability to share stories and inspire people to care, but also do this really important research. Do you have any stories about an animal maybe in your care that maybe you've done something cool with in terms of research or otherwise?
We've got, I'll share two great stories with you. One is with when we had during COVID, which we all recently experienced, we had our gorillas at our safari park get COVID. First gorillas to get COVID in the world. And we immediately had our vet care, our nutrition team focus on what is happening, how do we take care of this. These team members ultimately are family, right? How do we take care of them? And what the group immediately started to focus on was how can we stabilize them? What's different from human dynamics versus animal dynamics? How can we kind of make sure that we're caring for these animals as best we can? I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm sitting on Jane Goodall's board, and I called Jane right when this happened, and I called her and said, hey, this is going to go public. We're going to make this statement that our gorillas have COVID. And she said, there's no better place in the world for them to be than with you, because they'll get the best care. And so that allowed us to really go into that process saying, we're going to make sure we do our very best to care for these gorillas. And what was incredible is all of our partners in the field who we work with, and some that we don't work with, reached out to us and said, tell us what's happening with the gorillas, because we can't see that on the ground in the wild. You guys will be able to diagnose that, you'll be able to assess the challenges, and you'll be able to share that information. And that's exactly what we did. So we get to be this wonderful space of sharing knowledge with partners so that we can be better caretakers of wildlife. The other story that I'll share is with the one with Polar Bears International, where we actually partner with you guys on some amazing work. One in particular is we allow our support our polar bears to go on basically a treadmill that we get, and they do it voluntarily by choice if they so choose to do that. And they'll walk on that treadmill, and we'll teach us about calorie burn. They'll teach us about sort of what their biology changes, what happens in their health, how we can monitor their ongoing health with that sort of behavior, and how we can then share that knowledge with you guys so you understand out here how far that bear is going to be able to move in the wild. What's that range based on its food consumption? It gives you guys knowledge that then we can learn, okay, what other tests, what other understandings do we need to learn? What else can we learn from the bears that are in our care? And so we've got a lot of those examples that we kind of work with you guys on.
Yeah, it's amazing what we can do when we come together and we collaborate and we, get in the same room, get to know each other, build relationships, build understanding, and then we have this whole framework from which to do, better work on. Having the polar bears in the zoo, walking on the treadmills and all the energetics, it's so cool. I am fortunate to participate in our maternal den study that we work super closely with the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance on. And it's so fun to go put those den cameras out at a den site and think, okay, we're going to get all this footage back, and then they're going to look at it, and they're going to look at their collar data and the accelerometers and compare it all, and be able to learn so much about energetics and polar bears and how they spend their time.
It's understanding behaviors, right? Is how can we bring some of our behavioral knowledge to you guys, and then you guys back. As you're seeing behaviors out here, how do those match the bears in our care? Do they match? Are they similar? What can we learn from each other? That's powerful because it ensures that we're taking care of the wildlife in our care responsibly and as well as we can. So.
Not to mention the footage from those cameras is like super cute. I mean, some of the coolest footage of bears emerging from their dens. I mean, not quite as cool as the footage in the Disney Polar Bear movie. That movie, the footage, if you haven't watched it, it's incredible. I've watched a lot of polar bear footage, and I've never seen some footage like that. So, just absolutely amazing kind of what we can do when we come together and we collaborate. So with that, I want to kind of take another turn towards storytelling, and Georgina and I have a bit of a story of how we came to find each other, actually. I came to Churchill in the spring hoping to work on a research project on coexistence in the community. Right when I arrived, I was like, I need to just go visit our dear friend Helen. And I went over to Helen's house and chatted with her about what I was doing, and she said, you must meet Georgina. So we start chatting and getting to know each other, and it turns out Helen and Georgina were working on this journaling project. And, they told me a little bit about it, and then I went home, and my girlfriend, a good gal friend of mine, said, hey, I'm doing this journaling project, you should really do it with me. And I was like, oh, I'm busy, but maybe, okay, and so I started doing it. Well, I came back to Churchill, Georgina and I sat down to start working on our research, and I said, "Oh, I'm doing this journaling project." And she said, "Me too." And it turns out, when you get to chapter 8 in the journaling project, they have you go back to the very beginning of your journal and reread everything and circle the themes and the trends and the various things you find in your journal.
The patterns.
The patterns to learn about yourself. And we were sitting there sharing this, and I said, "Georgina, that's science. You're a social scientist. We're doing this together." And so it was just so cool to realize, you know, that we were really doing very similar things, and by working together, we could enrich that so much. So we used storytelling in our research, and we chose to do that instead of using like interviews, which would be more of like a Western science way of doing that. And so, Georgina, I was hoping you could share, you know, what was it like using storytelling instead of interviews, and how did we go about that? What did it feel like? What was your experience with that?
So we decided that the best approach would be to invite several people at once, groups up to 4 to 6 people or 4 to 5 people. And it turned out to be a wonderful thing, because never would I be sitting around my community with a group of people I've known for 30 years or so, and all of us sharing our story. That way has kind of been lost in our culture, and just to do it again around the table was wonderful. You know, we kind of remembered a little bit of a story, and another one would kick in what happened with, you know, the end result of it, or, you know, someone would remember something else, and it just turned out to be so lively, and we wanted to sit there longer, but we had to end our time together after a couple of hours. It was like a couple of hours would go by, and we were wanting to tell more stories, and so it turned out wonderful. Like, and how many groups did we have? Like 6?
Something like that, yeah.
And every group was like that. They were just so excited to be sitting around, and that's the Indigenous people. They've always had that in the culture, and so, you know, you could see the benefit of it.
It was so cool.
Yeah, it just was so nice.
Everyone said, like, this has been so healing, and we want to do this more, and we want to sit around and tell stories more. And what was so beautiful was one story would, just as Georgina said, it would remind someone else of another story. And we did some just with one person, you know, whatever anyone was comfortable with, but we found the small groups were really, really just kind of magical.
And then just even allowing someone to tell their story. It's always always nice. I remember the one lady we sat with, she was an elder, and she was so thankful that someone had come and had tea with her, and she wanted to tell us more, but of course we had to get going, and but it's wonderful.
She said, I think at the end, something like, "This was so nice. I wish I had known a little more what it would be like, because we could have chatted longer." Which, you know, so there's these threads of story in so many different ways, and in conservation, which brings us back, Paul, to conservation, which is really at the heart of what the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance and Polar Bears International, you know, our work to conserve polar bears and wild species around the world. So can you tell us a little more about storytelling in conservation more broadly?
Yeah, I think it's something that was striking to me when I started to get into trying to think about telling stories in nature with Disney Nature 10, 15 years ago, was that the audience wasn't going to digest stories differently than how they digest stories in their regular life. So we needed to think about how to tell stories effectively in the way that people could listen, the way that people could hear. And that is affected by format, that's affected by style and approach. But you know, when you think about all the different ways to tell stories today, whether it's movies, television, social media, campfire, around the campfire, in a social circle, all those create different formats, from lengths to detail to levels of information to the way that we tell it. And we have to adapt to those formats so that people can really get the message and story in. And when it comes to conservation, this is, I think, one of the challenges that we all across conservation have, is to get people to hear the message that we want to make sure that they hear, that they get as enthusiastic or are aware of the issues we want to raise with them. And I think that's, we want to naturally, because so much of our work starts in science, we want to share science first. And the truth is that that's not how people digest stories. They need to get to there. You need to open the door, open the heart, open the heart first, and then get them to care first. Get them to feel a connection to the story. Have it have meaning, have it have purpose to their go, I want to lean in and learn more. That's then when we can open up to a deeper dive of here's some facts, here's the data of what's really happening out there. And it will cause people to care more, because it comes in through the heart and first instead of the mind first. And that is, I think, a core way we need to think about conservation storytelling, is it needs to start in the place that we know works for the way people consume stories of all types.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about curiosity a lot with our education programs, and I really like that, because you almost need to sort of have, fall in love or have that heart piece, which causes you to just become more and more curious and want to learn more and dive in. And I feel like we did quite a bit of formatting for our storytelling. Maybe we would have used a different word per se, but what are some of the things, Georgina, we did just to sort of make it like a comfortable space, like to adjust what we were doing to the audience that we were working with?
Well, we fed them. We had cookies and tea and coffee. And
Always a good start to a story.
Yeah.
It's a warm meal.
yeah, and I think another thing was we got them to go back in their childhood and remember the first time they saw a bear. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes that was a little bit scary, and it certainly got your heart going, because it would get your heart going at a faster rate. But yeah, we got them to, relive their childhood a little bit, and then come from there to share their story with us.
And I think we kind of tried to create that campfire feel too, like you were saying, have a lot of time, have some tea and coffee, sit in a circle and just create that environment. And so whether you're doing that, or it's a movie, or it's the community at the zoo, visiting the zoo, or working with people in the field, it's always adjusting to that audience and who you're working with. And, we've been chatting a little bit, Paul, as you've been here with us in Churchill about, connecting it to the why. And I don't know if you have further thoughts on that maybe you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that consumers, when they digest information, they make a judgment call early on. Is this relevant to me? Is this relevant, or is this important to me? And they'll decide yes or no relatively quickly. And a lot of that decision is based off the why. Why is this relevant? Is this important to me? And they'll go down that path. And what we have to do when we communicate and share stories is we have to bring the why forward. This is relevant to you. Your world is changing. You're feeling it. You may not connect it necessarily to what's happening up here in Churchill or what's happening in the Arctic, but our job is to help connect the story that what you're seeing change in your daily life, when you're seeing the hurricanes kick up at a higher rate, when you're seeing things seem to change in a different way than you recall growing up over a lifetime, the bears are seeing the same thing in a different aspect. And so understanding this change is connected, that the world is interconnected. And I think if COVID taught the world anything, we're all interconnected. The health of human health, the health of wildlife, the health of ecosystems are all connected. We talk it as one health, as a one health concept. And I don't think it's ever been more important in human history than right now that the world understands that. And so how do we do our very best to make sure the world understands that what they're seeing locally is in fact a global phenomenon. It's not just happening uniquely there, it's happening uniquely everywhere. And I think the more we can help people understand that why, the more that they can feel that connection to that as the polar bear is facing a challenge, that challenge is very much a challenge we face. So by helping the polar bear, we are in effect helping ourselves as humans. Some people, that's the way in that they need to hear. We talk a little bit about, there's been the status change of we're at a cliff of climate change, of that 2 degrees Celsius centigrade that's been talked about. And the problem is people don't understand what that means, because they look at the temperature change in their house every day by more than that. And so it's not relevant to them. So we have to sort of get past the science of that data point and share, well, you're seeing that happen in ways today just with a small change. So don't even connect it to that 2 degrees, connect it to more to the physical change you're seeing every day, and then connect it to what we're able to show through science up here is affecting the polar bears.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I feel like that's what we try to do out here on the buggy, right? We have the polar bears outside the window, and we want to, connect that to the why. And of course, polar bears are totally dependent on Arctic sea ice. But Arctic sea ice also acts as the world's air conditioner. It helps keep our planet cool. It helps regulate our climate. And so we all need Arctic sea ice. Polar bears need sea ice as a platform to hunt the ringed and bearded seals on, but we all need sea ice to help regulate our global climate. So no matter if you live in San Diego or across the planet or in Churchill, we're all connected to Arctic sea ice and connected to polar bears, even though they may be very far away. And I think that's something that's really challenging about polar bear conservation. It feels like it's this problem or this challenge that's super distant and super far away. But for Georgina and for people that live in Churchill, it's right in their backyard. So Georgina, could you just talk a little bit about what it's like living with polar bears every day?
So you become constantly polar bear aware or bear aware. Like this morning when I came out of the house, you have to peek out and you make sure there's nothing around. And then you have to get to your car and, make sure and then you sit and look out, in case there's, you just woke up one so it's constant on your brain. And like for our kids to get to school and, one of the constant things we heard in our research project was don't walk on the pipeline because that's the bear route. And kids don't listen anyway, but you have to tell them that. And another thing is I visited BC, a beautiful beach at Parksville, and I get out onto the beach and we put our blankets down, and the first thing I'm doing is looking that way and that way because we have to check for bears, like always, And my niece asked me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for bears." And she said, "There won't be any here, Auntie." But things like that. So when you're out of the community, it's still in you to be bear aware. If you're anywhere else, you're making sure you're taking care of your garbage properly because you don't want to attract a bear. And so it's just always in your bones, in your thoughts, and to be safe, And because if we put them in danger, then we risk their lives as well as our own. So we always have to be thinking about that.
And I feel like generally the sentiment in Churchill is that people are both very, a bit afraid. There's sort of like a fear, but a lot of respect for the bears. Yes. And people just really want to live alongside the bears and make sure that both bears and people stay safe.
Right, yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that all conservation is local. And all conservation starts with people. And I think that your story right there is it's in you every day. It's part of your life. When an organization like ours is trying to support efforts to protect polar bears, it's us supporting communities. It's us supporting people who live there. That's our role, right? As outsiders, trying to support it in the right way, in the healthy way, but be as supportive as we can with the skills that we can bring and offer. I think that's important for all of us to think about the role of how organizations like ours can support conservation efforts on the ground.
Yeah, and again, collaboration, right? And so we're super excited. I'm super excited, both personally and with Polar Bears International, to be building more relationships with folks like Georgina, continuing our amazing relationship with San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and figuring out how we can all support each other and work together. So the bear was just maybe looking up, might be cruising
Right there.
around. I think it might be a nice time to take some Q&A, a few questions that may have come in. Oh, and of course, you know, we knew this one would come in today. Georgina, people would like to know what Halloween is like in Churchill.
It's a very exciting day. Not only is it Halloween, but the whole town gets involved in keeping the children safe. Every emergency department, like the ambulance, the fire trucks, anybody with a lot of noise and lights, RCMP, they'll sit on the outskirts of the town starting at about 4 o'clock. They'll supervise the outskirts of the town, and they won't allow any bears to get into our inner circle. And then the children have from about 5 o'clock till 9 p.m. to go safely trick-or-treating. And at 9 o'clock, then all the emergency vehicles go back to where they belong, and the children know that that's time to go home with their goodies. And so it's quite an endeavor.
It's pretty incredible, and they
Yeah.
even fly the helicopter over the community
Did they
to
really?
look for bears before the kids start trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's because of the bears or exactly why, but it seems like the costumes in Churchill are some of the best costumes I've ever seen anywhere. I think because, you know, there's this emphasis on Halloween and keeping, you know, the kids and the community safe, people just go all out. And I mean, I've seen some of the best costumes I've ever seen in my life in Churchill. So we're excited. We have some buildings in town where we're going to be taking trick-or-treaters tonight. So we're excited to see all the costumes and engage with the community. And a few of our staff will be out participating in the patrol. So yeah, it's a super special day in Churchill today. Let's see if we've got any more questions coming in. Paul, I have one for you. And so, you know, the polar bear is very charismatic. Some might say it's perhaps an easy story to tell, although I might argue on that one. I think it can be hard to reinvent the wheel and really get at that heart piece. But, you know, how does telling the polar bear story differ from some of the stories of other wildlife and animals that you've worked with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's certainly some principles that are the same, that you need to find that connection point that's relevant to an audience, that they feel an emotional connection to, that they want to learn more about. I think the polar bears have a unique difference in the fact that they have become that poster child, if you will, for global warming, climate change. They've become that poster child for the loss of sea ice. Whenever anyone's talking about it, that animal's put forward. So in some ways, it's a powerful sort of opening statement to tell a story about polar bears. The challenge that I think is most relevant for people, or the relevant opportunity, is to find the story that relates to people the most, which is a family story in most ways. Polar bears have remarkable families, as was seen in the polar bear film. They have amazing families. You see the challenges, you see their struggles. Always when we were making Disney nature films, it was how do we make the story as relevant to the audience that's going to watch it, so they can feel the connection to the animal and feel that the choices they're making are the choices they would make if they were in the same spot. And I think that just makes us all feel more connected to wildlife. And I believe polar bears have an amazing ability to bring people in. They have those facial expressions that you can feel. You can almost feel like you know what they're thinking if you watch them long enough. And I think people find fascination with that. So giving them the way to do that, and at the same time find how do we relate the story of what that family member, whether it's a parent, whether it's a cub, a father, how do you connect them to people's own lives here? So I think that's an important piece of it, because then when you see the challenges that they're facing, how does that relate to a story in San Diego? You know, it's the loss of sea ice isn't going to be the thing that's relevant. It's that mom is taking care of that cub and is going to do anything for that cub. And how do we help audiences really feel that connection, that we have a responsibility to care for the wildlife on our planet. Here's a mother doing everything it can to care for its cub, and how can we help that? How do we help the proliferation of that species?
Yeah, and the film, that Disney polar bear film, really did an amazing job of that. And At Polar Bears International, we really are always trying to reinvent new ways to keep that hope alive, because there is sort of this tiredness with the polar bear, right? And that it's all doom and gloom, but like there really still is hope, and there is time to turn things around, and we have to focus on the solutions. And those solutions, which are, moving from an energy system that's based on fossil fuels towards a renewable energy system, is going to benefit all of us, not just polar bears. And we really do have time to turn things around for polar bears. And what that looks like is this swift transition to renewable energy.
I think there's when you look at what we get to do at San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, particularly at the San Diego Zoo itself, is to really bring forward the story of change, the story of what's happening and how it's changing, how we can make the story relevant of what's going on up here, down there, how we can, when we bring people through our polar bear experience and they can see the polar bears, they can understand what we're learning from them and how we're sharing that knowledge with you guys, and then what you're able to do with that knowledge and share new knowledge back with us. I think that's incredibly powerful, and I think that's what people want to know, that there's progress. And hope to me is connected to progress. If they feel there's movement, if there's optimism, and it comes from us. The hope and optimism has to come from us. If we feel we've lost hope, then the audience will lose hope. And I think that's, if we believe there's opportunity, it's our role to make sure not only that we continue the work, but that we show them there's hope. And we bring that forward either on social or through movies or through a day at the zoo or the park, where we get to share with them the journey of what we're all making possible by working together.
And ultimately with polar bears, we need hope, and we need to move towards this renewable energy future. And what's so exciting about Churchill in terms of that is, Churchill is really this amazing example of how people can coexist with polar bears. People here have been doing that for thousands of years. It's just part of who you are and part of who the community is. And that can, be an example and an inspiration for other communities around the Arctic. And we saw that as well in Svalbard, where the polar bear movie was made, where we just visited, that there's some amazing, innovative, renewable energy programs happening there that have an opportunity to be a model for other places. And it was so inspiring to hear about that on our trip.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So, telling a good story is knowing who you're talking to. And it's been lovely to talk to both of you today. And we know that talking about the climate and why we care is one of the most important things that we can do to move the needle. We need to keep this at the forefront of the conversation and, normalize talking about our concern for the climate. Something like 70 or 80% of people, they're worried, but they don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of what other people might think. So, making that more normal, more accessible, and one of the best ways that we can do that is by telling stories, by sharing our stories with each other, with the public, with research, and ultimately, hopefully, that will move us on the conservation front as well. So, with that, I think we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us today, to all of our viewers. We hope you enjoyed our stories, and we hope that you share your own with your friends, with your families, with your community, perhaps in a public way, maybe if you are interested in filmmaking or if you like social media. And I really want to thank Georgina, and thank you to Paul for joining us, and to everyone behind the scenes making this connection possible, my colleagues Elisa and BJ, our partners at San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, to Explore.org and the Explore.org community, and to Frontiers North Adventures, who makes it possible for us to be out here on Tundra Buggy 1 with the live polar bear cam right outside the window. So if you enjoyed learning today, be sure to ask an adult permission and tune in to future Tundra Connections broadcasts. Continue to check out the polar bear cam, as well as our other live cams. The Northern Lights have been out the last few nights, so check out the Northern Lights cam. And don't forget, if you're a teacher, to check out our free units and lessons and our discussion topics on Flip for more about learning about polar bears and protecting the habitats that we all depend on. So remember to follow your curiosity, to talk about what you love, and to share your stories. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again tomorrow out on the tundra.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.